welcome everybody. I hope everybody's having a great conference. I've said more words today than I have in the last week, and so this, for introverts, this is going to be like, we're going to sleep super well tonight. But this conversation is one I've been looking forward to for a long time, because we're going to talk about the mover behind all of the stuff. If you've had any other conversations today, yesterday, around skills first, skills based, we're hopefully with this session going to get to the prime mover, which is the culture. Now, I'm going to take a couple things and call the moderator's prerogative. In your session description, we actually asked the question, are certain companies based on size or industry better suited to adapt their culture for this seismic shift? We're not going to talk about size or industry, because those are things you can't change. Culture is actually one of the only things you can change, and that is very hard, as we'll talk about today. So I did a little bit of Googling just to get us started, because the internet is full of things, and one of those things is full of quotes about business. Culture is not an initiative. Culture is the enabler of all initiatives. Of course, the old Peter Drucker quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." People do not experience your intentions, they experience your behavior. And my favorite, one of my favorites, culture is what leads when no one is watching. So these default settings, these things we're trying to move and shape and change, can be really hard. So I'm going to ask this esteemed panel, we have 40 minutes, and that is, if we added a 0 to that number, we might have enough time for these 5 brilliant people to say what they really think and feel about this. But I'm going to ask each of them to tell us who you are, where you're from, that kind of thing, and also give us a short answer to this question. You know, what do most people, especially folks who aren't in people and talent leader positions, what do they get wrong about culture change? So let's start with you.
My name is Cameron Hedrick. I'm the head of learning and culture at Citigroup. I think the one thing people get wrong is they think maybe 1 or 2 variables will shape culture, and it takes way, way more than that. That's the short version.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Shin. I'm the Managing Director of Talent Rewire at FSG. And I think the thing that people get wrong about culture is they don't think about, well, you said culture shapes behaviors. What shapes behaviors are beliefs. So you need to be addressing beliefs when you address culture.
Hi, everybody. My name is Antoinette Chukudebelu. I have the esteemed pleasure of serving our staff in the role of Chief People and Equity Officer at Murmuration. And I think one of the things that people get wrong about culture is that they think it's a finite point, and that there's like a place where you can do culture change, you get to it and it's finished, but there really is longevity that you have to put into it.
Hi, I'm Jenny Dearborn. I've been a Chief Learning Officer 5 times, a Chief Talent Officer twice, and a Chief People Officer 3 times, and now I just do board work. And I would say I would go back to the science of behavioral economics and tap into hopes and fears when trying to shape a culture program, that you really sort of need to get to that fundamental sort of lizard DNA that we have when designing programs.
Hey everyone, I'm Brandon Sammut from Berkeley, California. I'm the Chief People Officer of Zapier, which is a workflow automation platform. An additional thing that I think folks often get wrong about culture is that you can't change it once you set it up, or that it's a happy accident if it does change. And I'd come back to what we heard from some of our other folks here on. At the end of the day, culture is about beliefs and behaviors, and you can architect change to those.
Awesome. So I want to point out a couple things. I'm going to note, nobody here mentioned technology. Culture is a people vehicle. It is about changing hearts, minds, actions, beliefs, those kinds of things. You can't just pop a piece of software and expect that software to carry your culture for you. It is hard work requiring change over time. You can't just flip one lever and make it happen. So as we think about skills-based mobility, I think we all recognize that culture plays a huge role because there are so many points of people in this process. And so Antoinette, I want to turn to you first, particularly because many organizations are framing this skills-based, skills-first movement as a way to achieve more equitable outcomes. And you're somebody who thinks about this work at the intersection of technology, people, civic and social change, and equity. And it strikes me that culture will be the reason why we get it right. And there is also significant opportunity to get it wrong because we don't think about the behavior side of that equation, the people change needs. So I'm just wondering if you could get us started, given your role and your expertise in this space, what are your thoughts on where equity lives in this space and how we can address our cultures to better support that?
Yeah, I really love this question, Haley. And I think, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of conversation about the future of the workforce and specifically like skills-based mobility, throughout the conference. And I had an opportunity to attend several of the sessions. And one of the sessions, a participant said, are we actually just replacing inequity? In terms of old hiring processes being like through tapping people, networking, et cetera, and new ones just being through skills-based, but thinking about, are we looking at those through what kind of badge do you have, what skill do you have, and is it just a new way of thinking about inequity? And I think that this is a really great opportunity to just reinforce the importance of like culture change and how you really need to build that trust from the ground up to ensure that all of your staff members, your leadership, and your managers know that this actually works. So when it comes to like skills-based mobility and culture change, you really have to think about like, how do you build investment? How do you show, right, through whether it's your hiring practices or some of the other things that you're doing in your organization to build trust to move things forward?
Kim, so your role within Talent Rewire, you're consulting companies all the time, and you really have a front row stage to them getting it wrong, right? I imagine,
And right sometimes.
and right sometimes, right? But I imagine that a lot of companies are really grappling with trust, right? How to move at the speed of trust, but not create more distrust as a result of their programs. And so in our conversations, we were talking about this disconnect often, particularly between executives, frontline managers, and supervisors. What lessons have you learned over your time leading this organization and working with companies that you think might be illustrative of the group?
Yeah, I think there are 2 points that this makes me think about. One is culture is, I think leadership plays a huge role in shaping culture. Like, it is hard to shape culture without having leadership like actually on board and leading and modeling what that culture should look like. I think where we've seen, particularly in the skills-based movement, maybe less attention focused on is equipping and building the capacity of those hiring managers, the people who are actually making the hiring decisions and building their capacity around shaping culture and shifting their beliefs. Because if you fundamentally believe that a degree is the best way to signal whether someone is going to be successful in a job, even if you remove the degree requirements, even if you change processes, that hiring manager is still going to be focused on the degree. And what's really challenging, though, is hiring managers exist across a company. There's so many. I can't even imagine how many are at Citi. And so how do you reach all of those people? So that's one, is that we need to be thinking about embedding that culture throughout the organization and addressing those beliefs. I think the other thing that's been really surprising to me that I didn't think about initially is the importance of actually shifting the beliefs of employees themselves. Because I was working with a company that was trying to move toward a more skills-based internal mobility model. And so they had set up a platform. I'm not biased. No, I'm not promoting anything, but they set up Workday to have an internal marketplace where people could identify opportunities to build skills and to move up, advance within the company. But the company had a history of doing external hires for mid-level manager roles from outside. And so even though they had set up this system and they really wanted their employees to apply for these roles, there was that lack of trust. Because the employee was thinking, why should I apply when they're just going to hire that other person from outside the company? And so they realized, wow, they had come up with a tech solution and yet hadn't addressed the human problem. And part of that is trust and shifting the beliefs of even the employees themselves of why should they be utilizing this platform? Why should they change their behavior? Why should they trust the company?
So thinking about Citi, she told you, your organization is incredibly complex, right? And I think you actually just went through it, decomplexifying, if that's a word, process, where maybe you reduced the number of levels in the company. But I think about, for a lot of companies that are even not as complex as a group like Citi, how are you thinking about where the change happens, right? You talked a lot about, when we were talking about the prep for this panel, proximate relationships, investing where the currency goes in managing the change. And as the guy with culture in your title, shed some wisdom for these folks.
I struggle with culture in my title. I think that's curious and weird, actually. But that's a different session. It's a philosophical conversation for another time. To answer your question and to sort of reflect on some of what you were saying, here's how I think about it. There are these proximate variables, which we should talk about, and then there's these distal variables. So let's talk about some of the distal variables that have to be in place. And I think this is true regardless of the size of the company. You have to have an alignment of systems. So your performance management process, your comp design, your hiring process, your senior leaders. There are about 30, actually, that I sort of go through and check for alignment. Those kind of create the conditions for good things to happen. It doesn't ensure that good things will happen. It just simply increases the probability that it might happen. And then the more proximate ones are. Typically, there's really only 3 proximate relationships that matter at a firm, irrespective of the size. There's your peers and your boss, and then to a far lesser extent, your boss's boss. Beyond that, it becomes an extraction. And when you're 8 layers deep, like Citi, our CEO to the person at layer 8 is sort of this idea of a thing. So if you tend the proximate and the distal, you create the conditions for good things to happen. Now, beyond that, it's very hard to control. But those are the factors that I look at first.
Excellent. So when we all read the report, the Burning Glass report several weeks ago that came out, that wondered why, boy, all the CEOs have made these proclamations. We've only seen 3% movement. We shouldn't wonder why. We should wonder what could have happened had those proximate relationships been, say, given more currency, had these proclamations translated into practice change and gotten to the ground, which is, of course, step 2. So, Jenny, you've actually, you had a deep experience in Boston implementing a skills-based program at the height of the pandemic. I'm hoping you can walk us through both why, what the program was designed to do, and how you're sort of reflecting now that you're past that experience about how culture led to it and ultimately led to what happened at the end of it.
Yeah. So I'll tell a quick case study. A couple chief people officer jobs ago, I was in Boston, and you remembered, everyone was hiring, and it was talent was very scarce, and we needed customer service agents and support folks. And there were certain demographics that would get very close in our very rigorous interview process and not make it to the final job offer stage. And so we did an analysis, and we said, what's going on with this demographic that is preventing them from making to that final stage? Because these are good jobs, they're remote jobs, they're high-paying jobs, and we want to do more to help. And so we had a culture of experimentation, and we had a culture of pilots. And I said, okay, well, let's take a group of 30 people that almost made it through, that didn't get the offer, and let's bring them on as contractors and put them through an 8-week training program and teach them all of the things that they didn't get quite right in that interview process. Whatever it was maybe technical skills, it was mostly how you position yourself, how you show up. There were a lot of people skills, human skills. And so we brought them on, and it was a very small investment of funding, but we had one person dedicated to creating kind of an 8-week curriculum for that person. We brought them in as contractors, and then we interviewed them again at the end of the 8-week experience, and all but 2 were offered full-time jobs. So it was a great lesson for us, because at first the senior managers and the managers that have this bias, oh, you need to meet these requirements in the 6 interview process. And actually, you don't need to have to demonstrate those things in these 6 30-minute interviews to be able to get this job. But you do have to know them eventually. And if we give them a little bit more scaffolding, these can be great employees that are so motivated and wonderful. So we sort of broke that cultural paradigm of if you don't demonstrate these competencies in 6 30-minute conversations, then you can't do the job. So we had a culture of, just testing it. I would just say to people, what's the worst that could happen? Let's just try it and see how it goes. Because we can't find enough customer service reps. We can't. And we did the program, and every 28 folks got jobs, and they're still there. And then it was quarter after quarter. Okay, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And then when pandemic ended, and we have then we had what was it called? Quiet quitting? I can't remember all of the things. And then I left, and all things changed, and they said, well, let's just go back to the system that we know that works really well, which is you demonstrate it in 6 30-minute phone calls.
So it took an imperative, namely, you couldn't find the talent you needed in Boston to work at that price point in this way, right? It took your nose to the grindstone, convincing people, I love this, like, what do we have to lose? Come on. Because we treat everything like it's a huge risk, and actually, they're contract employees, right? You're
8 weeks of contractor spend is very small.
Right.
Really is a small investment.
Compared to a dried up pipeline that leaves positions open for any duration, right? And then, I'm really curious about the end of it, flipping back, defaulting to the to the process that actually weeded out all of these amazingly talented people. What is your sense of why?
It's just what's easier. So part of your culture change needs to be supporting something. Somebody said making sure it is ongoing and it's not just a one-time thing. So the imperative was not enough candidates in the pipeline, and good candidates were getting multiple offers. We remember this during the pandemic. And then now you have a glut of candidates and really great candidates in the pipeline, and it was an easy decision for somebody after I left to say, why go through the effort of an 8-week program for 30 contractors and contractor spend and a project manager and all of that stuff when we have fantastic candidates that are, that we can now bid down in their salary that we know are experienced because they got laid off someplace else. So it just became a default of what was easier. And then, we had one very strong demographic and a really nice swing to a more diverse group, and then it swung back.
So, the lessons I'm taking from this, many, but that it takes a Jenny, right?
It takes a champion. It just takes a person to push and
Right.
just say, we're going to keep doing this, even with resistance.
Yeah, go ahead, Cameron. Oh, I'm sorry. You were moving your microphone. I thought you were going to say something. But it takes a champion in the organization, and it's sort of a Sisyphus kind of thing. You're rolling the stone up the hill against the default. But I love I hate the term, we never waste a crisis. I hate that because we should just do the right thing. But here we are in crisis. And Brandon, when we talked, you talked about you need a pain point. You need something for people to rally and motivate around. And you also used this term ignite, which I was like, hey, and used it multiple times. Because this strikes me as a very slow burn sort of territory. It's hard to get some people excited about it. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, what do you see as the best way to start to shift in a more permanent way this culture change, away from default behaviors and toward more lasting stuff?
Absolutely. Before we go there, Jenny, I want to build on your example because you really got me thinking about and this builds on what you said too, Cameron. You were talking about like systems change and how it all has to fit together for durable culture change. And then I was thinking about your case study, Jenny, and I was thinking like, well, what would it take from a systems perspective for that to persist? And the first idea that came to mind is, bizarre as it might sound, this is an unhinged idea, is, what if the, CPO and the CFO with the CEO agreed that from now on we're going to start measuring the cost of a headcount, including the opportunity cost of not having the role. Like the cost of the business of not having someone working on that. If we could even roughly size that, how would that change folks' sense of urgency to think unconventionally about staffing some of these roles? So just like fascinating example there. And I'll match you an example for an example too, to get to your question, Haley, on this notion of like igniting culture change, because something I think we've all talked about in our own ways is around like, how do you make it durable? Right, and so the ignition point of a pain point is a good start, but part of what this conversation challenges me with is, how do you anchor culture change on a point of durable pain or opportunity that everyone can see and hold on to for some length of time? Because like you said, best of all, Jenny, like culture change doesn't persist by itself. So in terms of our quick case study on the topic of, well, what can sustain the change durably, we'll talk a little bit about Zapier for a minute. So this is a quirky 800-person software company. It's an all-remote team with folks in 42 countries. And in Q1 of last year, we called what we called a code red. It sounds alarmist. It kind of was, right? And not everyone was cool with it at first. But this was a code red all around AI. You get a memo from Wade, the CEO, and it kind of sounds like this. It says, we can already see that generative AI in particular is going to meaningfully influence our ability to achieve our mission to make automation work for everyone with our customers, and that's exciting. However, we don't know how it's going to change it, and we don't know how much of that's going to be done to us or how much we're going to be able to shape it. We need to be able to shape it, right? And the number one way that we think we can do that is by making sure that we all, meaning all 800 folks, all roles, functions, and levels and locations, learn how to use this new technology in our daily work. And there were 3 reasons why, and this is when thinking about like a durable reason for being for a culture change. What I admired about how Wade went about it is multiple stakeholder approach, right? From the company already had a culture of like empathy for the customer, spending time with customers. It's like our customers are asking us for help with this. The same question we are asking ourselves, they are asking themselves. And what better way to meet them shoulder to shoulder in that than to figure out how are we supposed to be using this in our daily work, which is all about helping them be amazing in their work. So that was thing number 1 from a customer point of view. The second one was from a business point of view, which is like a disruptive opportunity for the business, one that could pass us by or right, like take our ability to have impact to a totally new altitude. And then for the employees themselves, pretty clear to see that this is going to change how work gets done. Why not make Zapier the place where you can say 10, 15 years from now, this is the place, right, that made the space and gave us the imperative, this is where I learned how to do all of this. And it future-proofed my career. So 3 different facets on that. That was the case for change. And then from there, we did a variety of things we could talk about deeper in the conversation to, create an environment, very specific practices like you were speaking to, Cameron, earlier, to make sure folks could actually get into it. The number 1 thing we did, by the way, is we were really clear about the role that we saw AI playing in our workforce plan. Because we did probably 3 dozen specific things to create a culture of learning around AI at the company that year. But the most important thing we did is we were really clear that we saw AI as a helper for our people and their jobs, not as a replacement for them. And that we told the company, you will see that in our actions moving forward in terms of our staffing plans and conspicuously what we do not do, right, at this company when it comes to staffing and AI. And that unlocked, I wouldn't actually say it unlocked. It just became, it's a Maslow's thing, right? That's the foundation. It's job security. It's like, don't ask me to teach you how to use AI in my job. If I don't know, I'm going to get to keep it at the end of it. So there's some fundamental things like that that I think just have to be said for this type of change to take place.
I'd be really curious, for the 3 of you who didn't talk necessarily about the durability, right? Getting out of pilot is the bane of our collective existence, right? How do you take something that affects 30 people and make it affect 3,000 or 300,000? And how do you switch from the, I'm in a pilot mode, I'm protected from the risk, into a, I'm going to take the big jump because I can trust what's come before me and I trust myself. So anything that you guys have to add on that, creating the durable nature of this?
Yeah, I love that framing of like the durable problem. And it made me think about a company that we were working with, and who moved to Skills, and they had started out with a pilot of 5, like hiring it's an apprenticeship program to bring in non-degreed individuals, and this is a professional services firm. So they've traditionally hired like on-campus recruitment is their thing. But they're like, we're gonna start an apprenticeship program to bring in people without degrees into our entry-level roles. And they started with a pilot of 5 people, so really small. And this is like, I don't know, tens of thousands of people, employees. And this is just their US branch, or their US presence. And now they've scaled to 20% of their entry-level hires are from this apprenticeship program and don't have degrees. And this is within a span of 9 years. So, I mean, it's taken some time. But I think what they did is they identified the durable problem. They looked at their data and they looked at their current workforce needs. They focused on roles where they were actually experiencing talent shortages, but they also looked at their talent forecasts of what are their future needs. And they were really able to clearly articulate the why of pivoting to this skills-based approach. And so that gets to like how it seemed like your CEO really articulated the why for the company. Why are we doing this? How is that fundamental to our mission? How is it fundamental to our team? How is it fundamental to like even individual roles? And that's come up in this group of companies I'm working with actually on culture change, is the importance of being able to articulate the why and really get it down to the granular, specific level of this is why we were doing this.
Yeah, and then doing that translation, right? The why for your C-suite is one thing, and the why for your front line could be a varietal of that, right? The people who are not motivated by the shareholders or those kinds of things. You got to do the translation. Jenny.
I was just going to add that I could have done more in my program to communicate it broadly to the company and create more champions and more stakeholders and get more people across the employee population, you know, really excited about this so that it would live in their zeitgeist and their, you know, they would all feel so, everyone that heard about the program was very proud and excited and felt good about it. And I work for a company that's doing this right thing and social justice and things like that. But I didn't do enough to communicate it over and over and over. I didn't want to come across as bragging, or I don't know why, but I just didn't. And then without that, you know, people all buying in emotionally, hearts and minds, it sort of faded away.
And I think one of the things that we're doing at Murmuration from a people team perspective is really thinking about that ecosystem, Cameron, in those systems. So not only thinking about like the hiring manager and the hiring practices, but then connecting it to how we are actually building skill sets and developing our talent currently. So we just rolled out and are in the process of rolling out a new career lattice that's really based on skills. And that has really been part of what we have been able to do to ensure durability and a cultural change that can move us forward and is nimble enough for us to continue to keep evolving depending upon the skills that we will actually need as an organization moving forward.
So I really appreciate so many things about what y'all just said, but Brandon, your point about getting practical, getting tactical, right? There are specific things that we are all going to do that make this not just something we believe, but something we're demonstrating on a constant basis. I think people hear culture, and in a lot of minds, they think what happens at the water cooler, or the informal conversations that happen when your boss traps you in the bathroom and you're like, let me leave, please, because this is so weird. But
My boss is
Especially if he's a
female, so that'd be
different
really
gender.
weird.
that would be weird. Okay, that's just me then, I guess. But I appreciate this idea that it's not only this, it's about translating this into action. But one other thing that I wanted to just put out there, and this is as much question as observation, we had 3 prep calls for this panel, and independently, each of you sort of brought up this concept that what we do now, which is hiring and supervisors, they're hazing. I went through this, so you have to go through this, right? Somehow you getting this without getting your degree or without you demonstrating this thing diminishes mine, right? And it does strike me, having worked in higher education for such a long time, it's been very difficult to get fraternities to stop doing this very harmful and dumb thing, despite the rules and laws and all of this we have to enforce. So knowing just how deeply this hazing is wrapped up in people's own sense of self-worth, their own biases, their own ideas of who deserves what, I'm wondering if you think about incentives, right? What are ways that instead of creating the pilot that speaks for itself, or the Jennies that are evangelizing, or the data that can show the way, what kind of incentives do you think would make a difference as we start to implement? Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, you see me, I'm raring at the bit for this one. So, you know what you made me think? I was hearing incentives, and there's something about that, I bristled at that. I was like, I don't want to incentivize to do something that's just the right thing to do, or I don't want to, it's like, okay, well, what would I substitute that with instead, right? Because I'm picking up what you're putting down, and the word that came to mind was interruptions. So I don't want to incentivize folks to do a thing that I think is just patently good for the business, but what is a like a performance expectation or a company value? What is something that I think that manager, or whatever the case may be, is aligned to, does care about, that is, whether they recognize it in that moment or not, in conflict with their view that, I did it this way, others need to follow in exactly this path, and use that as a way to interrupt, some of these behaviors that we're trying to change.
Yeah, this is interesting. I might downshift the word hazing to, I don't know, some holding on to some protocol or process that they went through and in the past. I know this seems incredibly simple, but I had two reactions to that point. One is that we've got a problem with that person's wiring to start with, so I might want to look at that. And moreover, we just need to show them a different way. I mean, that model's antiquated. A better way for you, a path of least resistance and success for you, because people are oriented toward their own well-being, is this other path here. So it might just be a function of us not creating better ways and more enlightened ways to go after it. I think that could be as much about as anything else.
Well, I think one of the things that drives a lot of folks, especially in hiring, is just time. And oftentimes prevents them from actually going through the full process to ensure that the individual has the skills, because they don't want to spend the time, right? They're already having to hire somebody, they're already backed up, and now you want me to spend more time actually going through and going deeper to ensure that this individual has the skills. And I would really just rather probably tap the person that I think is going to be great, or I'm going to make assumptions about somebody's skill set. And so when it comes to incentivizing, I agree, we don't want to necessarily incentivize someone to do the thing that we need them to do, but I do think that there's buy-in that we can actually get through showing people and building that trust that we talked about in the beginning, that actually if you are focused on skills, you're actually going to save time. And that might be the place where we can actually incentivize people, and that just has to work one time for them to do it again, and for it to kind of spread and be word of mouth for us to get buy-in on the program.
I have behavioral economics on the brain because I'm rereading Daniel Kahneman's work, because he just passed a few weeks ago. And one of his pieces of research is that humans are more motivated by avoiding bad things than they are motivated by going towards good things. So the fear of missing out, you can nudge in a positive way, it'll be good for you, you'll like it, all of that stuff. But as soon as you say this bad thing might happen to you if you don't, okay, they're motivated. So just kind of when you're thinking about incentives, it doesn't hurt to go back to some of the fundamental research around human behavior. It's helpful.
Awesome.
Well, I think the thing that's coming to mind for me is time horizon. I love that you brought up time, and then time horizon, because change does take time. And I do think that when you're asking someone to change their behaviors, it is an interruption, for them. And if their incentives are to do the quick hire, and then they fall back on like, well, this is what I know to do. This is what's going to be quickest for me. It's like, how do you also, in terms of, with that interruption, like pairing it with like a shift in a time horizon? I don't know. That's something that's like come to mind. And how do you give space and time for people to learn the AI, to have the, the freedom, the capacity, the autonomy to learn that AI? I don't know.
Yes, love it. We've got just a few minutes left. I'm wondering if folks have questions for this amazing group of folks. Yes. Use your teacher voice.
Here we go. Thanks for the presentation. This is awesome. I'm in a case with my colleague here, and I'm also a frontline manager. One thing I've seen a lot is frontline managers are typically frontline employees did not get the development, became into the role, so they perpetuate the same exact thing. I see a lot of the trainings tend to go to mid-level executives. It's kind of like a trickle-down approach, right? Which is eventually they'll get down there. But there's not a lot of training for like frontline managers, and that's the population thing you may have said it earlier. That's the company experience for employees. What are your thoughts on why there isn't that focus on that population, the frontline managers?
So I have a hypothesis. Oh, you go. Okay, I'll go really quickly and you finish. So my hypothesis, we actually are putting out, we just put out research late last week about manager mindsets and how to set up frontline managers as like agents of change within their companies. Because yes, that's so true. And my hypothesis, although it hasn't been stated in all the interviews we did, is that like, again, if you fundamentally believe that your frontline, I think there's a lot of organization systems are set up to treat frontline employees as like disposable.
Yes.
Or fungible, then why would you invest in their managers? And so I do think there's a mindset to that. But yes, that is like such an under-resourced area of frontline supervisor training.
I think it's fundamentally because we don't think that leadership and management is a skill. It's a new thing. And I can't prove this, but somewhere back in time in the last 150 years, I think it was probably birthed because of the apprenticeship models we grew up with in the several hundred years before we came along. It's that if this person can do this thing pretty well, then let's just throw them in front of 10 other people and make sure they do it well too. Now that might work well with one person or two people, but then at some point it morphs and it's more about not just being a teacher to one person, it's many, and right there is when the synapse where everything broke down. And the reason we started in the middle or at the top is because that's clearly different. That's a clearly different thing. But I think that's why we missed it right there probably 100 years ago, I'm guessing.
And think why people get promotions, right? It's in tech, it's because you were the best coder, or you were the greatest at doing it. It's not because you were the best person to manage other people. In fact, you often see those things totally the opposite. The worst people managers are the best. So there's a lot of really perverse incentives, and that job is terrible, right? Think about the up and down the chain management that has to happen in that frontline supervisor role. There's not time and capacity in that person's life for more training, even if the company wants to do it.
One encouraging thing, though, I'll say is that in the last 10, 15 years, last 5 in particular, this idea that frontline management skill is important and matters and isn't soft has really come alive. Like, people are seeing it now, and so a lot more money is pouring into that space.
Right thing. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was thinking about the culture itself, about models and settings. There's spouse values that we say how we live it. Any of you using AI to actually assess the alignment for that, or any thoughts on best practices and how to baseline the assessment?
I have views, but I've talked a lot. Go ahead.
Brandon.
Well, this will be
Go,
quick because
Brandon.
we talked a lot about AI in terms of skilling our workforce, but we haven't turned around and used it to assess skills yet.
Be careful. That's the short version, I would say, at this point.
Yeah.
Be careful with thinking that we're at a place where we can accurately assess even technical skills, much less human attributes. Slippery slope.
And also follow the legislation, because it's starting to become illegal to do that in some countries and in some states.
Excellent. Okay, we've got time for one more, and I saw your hand.
So I'm the head of talent learning for a semiconductor manufacturing company, and we're 40,000 people. Over the next 5 years, we're going to double in size. So culture change and all that's very much on our minds. So I'm curious if any of you have experience with some of this or change initiatives personal cultures and what your thoughts would be on that.
Quickly, constant struggle for me at Citi because you don't want a homogenous culture for 200,000 people in 100 countries and 12 product lines. It does not work. So the question is, what must be the same? What are the systems that must be tuned and where do you want to let things organically shape around a particular client or particular culture? It's a really easy thing for me to say, but it occupies a ton of tactical time in the doing day to day.
I can speak to that. So I've also worked at 100,000 Hewlett-Packard, Oracle, big company. So we would think through what is the highest common denominator of competencies, skills, behaviors, whatever, that need to be consistent across, and then what can be organized, managed, documented at a local level, at a country level, and then just write it down and make it super clear and just say, okay, you're the country manager here. This is what is the same of what does it mean to be a leader at SAP? And then you add on top of that, what does it mean to be a leader in your country or in your business unit?
And then I would also say, like, all of those things are applicable to those that are in smaller organizations as well, regardless of if you have like different teams or departments and or different cultures in those teams or departments. A lot of those things are applicable at the same time.
Yep. The last thing I could share is you have a lot of choice around who you design with in the corporate-wide things. I think that span 100,000 person organization. Even if it's just 3 things, you still get to choose who's at the table to help you think about what those 3 things should be.
Love it. We've got the big hook from the clock, but I want to thank this, amazing group. Like I said, we could have used 400, not 40 minutes, but thank you for your attention and thank you very much.